Okay, so next question. In your book, it seems that you argue that knowledge requires one, appropriate reasons, two, true beliefs, and three, carefulness. So would you also affirm that our God-given image of God faculties, and you asked what is a faculty, but let's say it that way. I mean, would you affirm that our God-given image of God, call it a faculty if you will, has got to be functioning properly?
I would say that our God-given rational faculties always functions properly and is the basis for moral accountability. And this is the very problem I had with planting this view. If my cognitive faculties, particularly reason, could malfunction such that I don't believe in God when I ought to believe in God, then I have an excuse for my unbelief. I can blame God for it. You gave me faculties that malfunctioned. So I think moral evil consists in our having the capacity to use reason, the freedom to use reason, the clarity of general revelation. You mentioned Romans 1:20 earlier, and we still fail to know God regardless. I think we don't have an excuse. Whereas I think perhaps if I had cognitive faculties that malfunction, I could say, well, okay, sorry, God, I couldn't believe in you.
Right. Now you say God-given rational faculties always function properly, but surely, but there's people out there who do not possess properly functioning faculties. Now
we have to back up and say, what do we mean by faculty?
Well, okay, but what I mean, like with people who have suffered severe head trauma or something. What would you say?
So let's think this through a little bit. Is there a difference between a malfunctioning brain and malfunctioning reason? This gets us into questions about where our faculties are located, or I locate them in the conscious part of us, call it the soul or the mind.
Right.
What is soul malfunction? I would say it's the failure to use reason at the basic level. You have this capacity and you didn't do it. It is to neglect or avoid or resist or even deny reason in the face of what is clear to reason. And it has consequences. Natural consequences, and it may be like a death spiral. So it results in meaninglessness, where less and less meaning because we haven't been searching for meaning, and boredom, because when things are meaningless, we get bored, and when we get bored, we can't stand it. We're the kinds of beings that need meaning, and so we go into excess.
Oh, well, I just got to say, I don't think I've been bored for the past decade since I've started this study. I forgot what boredom was like.
I don't even know anymore. No way. And then when we're bored and we fill it with excess, we waste our time, our effort, our life, and we feel guilty because we did it to ourselves. And this is a kind of spiritual death. And it's not something God does to me. It's something I did because I didn't use my reason. So it does seem like God holds people accountable. There's a natural consequence. If you don't use your reason, you won't find meaning. But I don't know if God's going to hold me responsible for, I don't know, having memory loss from head trauma or, I don't know. Think about head trauma. What's going on there? It's natural evil. And perhaps it's the kind of thing God uses to get us to use our reason. I don't mean to sound harsh, but natural evil or physical malfunction, my brain is physical, right? Should call us to tend to moral evil or cognitive narding, I call it, neglect, avoid, resist, and denying reason. So it seems like the fit between reason and meaning and the existence of natural evil is a kind of perfect design and a perfect environment for people who don't want to use their reason, but there is a loving God who is not going to let you get away with it.
So could one have a brain tumor, for instance, that just is doing something in the brain? So, I mean, I'm a substance dualist. I believe that the soul uses the brain
I am
in the same way that a pianist uses a piano. And if the piano is damaged, then the pianist has all kinds of problems. So let's say there's a brain tumor in somebody's brain, and it's not allowing the soul, if you will, to connect the logical dots to reach rational or logical conclusions somehow. I don't know how that works. What would you say in that instance? Do they have properly functioning faculties then? Even if the soul is freed from the body, as J.P. Moreland once said, you'd be thinking quite nicely at that point. But it's not at that point. So
I'm not sure. Here, I'll give you a more relatable example for me. I yesterday was having a bad day, and I was thinking, boy, my mind is mush. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that show with Tim. And it was a physical thing, right? And so I said, I'm going to eat a good breakfast and get some good sleep, and I'll be, on top of my game. So there is a connection between our mind and our body. But is it ever to such an extent that we can't affirm as A? See, this is what I explore in that Reason and Proper Function book. What does it mean to have a malfunctioning cognitive faculty? I would say maybe there are people who have the capacity, but the capacity is severely hindered. I would say those are the exception to the rule, not the rule. And
definitely.
God probably isn't going to hold people to the same level of accountability. So maybe, is that person having meaninglessness to the same extent to the teenager in my class who isn't using their reason?
Yeah, I've talked a lot about how God would judge those who haven't yet reached the age of accountability. They're, perhaps they've never thought about logic before, how to reach rational conclusions. Definitely infants and toddlers, or those who have suffered some kind of head trauma. Ultimately, we don't need to get into this now, but I think middle knowledge can help answer some of these things, but that's a topic for another conversation. But something else you said, it seems to me that there's some folks out there today, and maybe I think of guys like Pharaoh in the Old Testament, where the author is clear that Pharaoh hardened his own heart, and I'd say, and also his mind, and then says that God hardened his heart as well. So, is there a way to make sense of both of those? And I think the answer is found in middle knowledge. But let me say this: you mentioned something about perhaps it's the case. Like, let's just talk about atheists, for example, that they resisted reason and they didn't have to. So there was a resistance, but they had the freedom, the libertarian freedom, not to. And they resisted it long enough that pretty soon now there's something about their thinking process. I don't know if sometimes it seems impossible to reason with them. I was talking to somebody today on Facebook, another person, and it seemed impossible to reason with them. I finally just put a GIF up there of a guy talking to a brick wall because I had nothing else I could say. Maybe that wasn't nice, but it seems that some people just don't have the ability, maybe their cognitive faculties, whatever those are, damaged, but they use their freedom to damage it. I don't know. What do you think? Yeah,
I'd like to go back to Pharaoh because I think that's a good example. What's going on in that story is that he is receiving revelation directly from God in the form of miracles. This is like the word of God coming to him directly. And so it is, I think it's the same thing for us too, not like a divine command from God, but the word of God, if we think of it in a broad sense, it is what we're facing. And you can either accept the word or reject the word. And Pharaoh is hardening his heart in rejecting that word that's coming to him. And God is hardening his heart insofar as God is not giving him the grace to accept that word. So I think we need to, I know this is a theological piece now, and I was just doing epistemology, but I think we have to talk about grace as an aspect of people accepting the word, I'll call it, the logos, using your reason. If you're dead, you're not using your reason at the basic level. And if you're dead and not using your reason at the basic level, you can't bring yourself back to life. Dead people don't raise themselves. So there's an element of grace in using reason. And I think we have to recognize that.
But even, right now, even Calvin and Luther and Melanchthon would say that those who haven't had any of that divine grace when it comes to salvation, how to think clearly regarding salvation issues, would still have that freedom. They didn't use the words libertarian freedom, but when you read them, they're talking about libertarian freedom. And I talk about this in my upcoming book. But they would say that they have that kind of rational presupposition, if you will, and ability to think regarding things of the world. Yeah. So, for example, atheists can also invent, atheists can get us to the moon and do surgery just like a Christian can, sometimes better. So,
yeah.
I would go ahead.
I would think that the person, let's just say a person in unbelief, they have the freedom to change their mind. The piece that you want to wonder is, why don't they then? And sometimes they want to give an argument about why they're not free to use their reason, but you're doing it right now. So we do have the freedom, and we come up with all kinds of arguments and excuses. I mean, sometimes arguments for atheism are really good arguments. They're just kind of excuses. So why can you argue in that level, but not at the level of, proving? Can you prove that God is? I guess you can't prove that God's not real, but can you prove that matter's all there is?
Yeah.
You're using reason to do that. What,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's an assumption.
Yeah.
Right. You can't prove that.
So rational presupposition is saying, let's go back to those assumptions and argue for the assumptions. And I think everybody, let's say everyone capable of doing so can do so. I mean, if you're a teenager and you're in my class, or a 20-year-old in my class who wants to argue with me, you're doing it. So why can't you do it at that level of belief or unbelief?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we might have to do another show on this topic too, because this is amazing, and we could probably spend at least 2 hours on that. But I would like to maybe wrap up in the next 20 or 30 minutes, if that's all right with you. But